All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Wednesday live stream. I was getting things set up here, so let me catch everybody up. There was actually kind of a lot of setup in the background. So at a high level, this is something I've streamed on before, but at a high level, I want to improve this mockery error message, exception message, technically. I feel like after using something like Laravel, especially with PHP Unit has improved these over the years. Pest does these well. Nuno's package for collision, it makes it even nicer. Hooks in and all that stuff. But like, look at Mockery. It's still, no pun, but like, it's a joke. It's a joke that this is still so technical. Mockery is like the de facto mocking language, so like I'd totally give it credit in that regard. But from a modern like messaging perspective, this is rough. Like it makes it feel like it's harder to use than it is, in my opinion. It's one of its barriers to entry per se. But like, look at this. It's like test data set 5. This is PHP unit in fairness. But here, mockery exception, invalid count, method put, la 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 la. Here's these huge arguments, which are kind of irrelevant at this point, from, some technical name that Mockery gave your mock, should be called exactly 1 times, but called 0 times. There's just, again, we could pick at it. I'm not trying to be mean, but I would love if this said something much more like PHP unit. It was like, okay, hey, I think we talked about this. Again, I talked about this before, but like if you look at a database assertion in Laravel, for example, it kind of says, you looked in the database for this. We didn't find that one, but there was a similar record that looked like this. And then you can kind of do a little bit of comparison. Or if you do PHP unit and you like compare 2 strings, even if they're really large strings, it kind of gives you a diff. It's like, hey, this line and this line and this line were like different. Here's kind of the plus and minus as diff. And then again, if we tap into something like collision, it's going to highlight that and do an even better job. This is just, it's rough to kind of parse, right? It's very, very technical. You have to parse this out and know what Mockery's really trying to tell you. And I would love it if you could have it be a little more modern and do, using Laravel, using collision, using PHP unit as examples, have it feel a little more like that. So that's kind of the goal. That's a big goal. Again, I spent probably 2 or 3 streams trying to make that happen before. But I learned a little bit along the way. So I have a new approach now. So we're just going to start completely fresh. I'm not going to take any code or any attempt from that other stuff. I think what I'd like to do is, I made this exception happen. So this is kind of the hardest one, in fairness. The hardest one is where this thing did not get called, but a similar call happened. That's kind of the hardest one. If you got a call and you didn't fake something out, the current message is not terrible. Again, it could be a little more human, but it's not as dense as this. This is probably the densest message when it's just like, hey, this thing wasn't called, 0 times. But there was a call. It just didn't match up. This is where like Mockery just doesn't help at all in these cases. It's like, I'd really love it to say, again, there was a similar call that just didn't match. Here's what it looked like. It was close, right? So let's see if we can kind of figure out a way to make it do that. And again, I've done a little work before, so I'm gonna move a little faster this time. I don't think there's gonna be any PRs by any means at the end of this stream, but I think there's an opportunity to kind of have light at the end of the tunnel. So what I've done is I've changed this fixture that I have, which Mockery uses, to not have this post, forcing this failure, aka exception, for the invalid count. So here's what Mockery was expecting. The call that it got has comma post right here on the second argument. So again, I would love if Mockery could say, found, okay, this error message is kind of okay, but it found a similar call, and here was kind of the difference, right? It'd be super awesome if it said something like, hey, method put on file system, should have been called 1 times, called 0 times, found a similar call, Mockery received a similar call, where argument 2 was different, or something like that. Doesn't even have to be that technical. So I'm going to dig down into Mockery. We kind of get some hints right here in the stack trace of like where this all starts to play out. So let's jump down into this exception director. I'm not even going to get the Mockery project right now. I just ran composer update, and this has the latest version of Mockery. So if we go down to what was that? 202. So what's happening is this verify is effectively failing. And if we dig down in here, which again, I've kind of done this before, and we kind of debug the instance of the validator, we end up kind of getting this exact count validate. This is the one being used. So if we jump into there, we see that this effectively ultimately throws that invalid count exception, which kind of says all these times, but called 0 times, because. Now this is kind of interesting, this because I don't know where that gets set, so there might be an opportunity to do something here, but kind of if we just edit these files and dump this out for now, I think this is null. So there might be an opportunity to piggyback. Yeah, it's null. There might be an opportunity to piggyback because, I don't know, but there might be. But what really needs to happen, if you're going to compare similar calls, then we effectively have to record all calls, right? And that kind of happens at this expectation director, is what I found last time. Now, actually, in fairness, I think this expectation director didn't exist like 5 or 6 months ago. Maybe it did under a different name. I don't remember, but I remember having to add a few small things to the core to get it to actually track. So right here, they track all of the expectations for this mock, right? So we know from this expectation director, it already kind of tracks all the mocks that are on this particular mock object. And it has a method in here, this kind of more or less magic method that gets called. And here it tries to find the expectation and give an initial thing of verifying the call. And if it doesn't verify the call, then it's gonna end up throwing, if it can't find it, it ends up throwing an exception here, potentially. This is kind of one of my gripes with exceptions. Once you start throwing them everywhere in the code, it can become really difficult to kind of untangle. Like what I find is programmers are either, again, sticking with the puns, programmers are either exceptional programmers, meaning they use a lot of exceptions, or they don't use them at all. They just would hear like they would return false or something here and then let it bubble up. There's obviously pros and cons to both of those things, but Mockery uses exceptions at like every level of the code base. And so that's kind of the other challenge of this. To have access to be able to add the data we need to give a better exception message is very difficult, low level in this exact validator. Whereas the expectation director has, more information at this point about the mock being called. This doesn't. This is, it's encapsulated down to this validation check. It only knows this thing wasn't called. And what they end up doing, if you kind of start to dig in here, what they end up doing is they really like stuff a lot of things on these objects to pass data around. And if I had the time and the familiarity, I would really love, I really think Mockery probably just needs to throw exceptions with data and then let them bubble up to a handler and then they would be able to have a central place, kind of like Laravel does, the exception handler, to kind of output what they need to output. But because they throw it at so many different places, it's really difficult to actually change these messages. So I kind of understand why they haven't been changed. That's my guess, anyway. Okay, anyway, tangent. What we need to do at the expectation director is we basically need to track the call. We need to track that a call came in here. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna say this calls. Let's just throw in the args, all right? And I'm gonna need to make this property, and again, I'm not gonna get a lot of auto-completion from PHP Storm since we're kind of hacking a vendor folder. But here we'll just throw in a protected calls equals that. Okay, so this is basically the calls that this has received. Whether they match or not is irrelevant. Again, this is going to allow us to track or record the calls that have been made. Now, if they, in that case, if they don't end up matching, or if they can't be validated or verified, this is going to allow us to do a comparison, right? So this ultimately gets called. It doesn't end up finding a matching expectation. Technically, this error gets thrown, but to the point I was making earlier, this, because of the mock type, it doesn't actually end up throwing or rethrowing this exception. Again, did a little, that's kind of from last time. So the point is, I can kind of prove this by saying, you know, dump here. We're not going to see here. Or sorry, we do see here, but the point is that even though this is thrown, that exception ends up getting caught, execution isn't stopped, and we end up ultimately calling verify down here. If we dump the expectation, we'll see that we get here where an exception is supposed to be thrown, but now we also get that expectation. So we can dig up higher in the mock library, but the point is that even though it throws an error because it couldn't find that exact exception, it allows the code to play on because it's like a quote-unquote partial mock, or a spy in this case, which allows the code to kind of play on, but then later the expectation ends up failing because it wasn't called. That one wasn't called that many times. So this, again, this is all deep mockery stuff. You know, it took a good hour of me kind of poking around the code to figure out. And again, this is kind of only one path, but in fairness, it's the hardest path. So I think if we can get this to work, we can probably get the other stuff to work too. So the point is that basically we need to try to verify this expectation. And again, this goes back to having to, you know, try and catch everywhere in the code for throwing exceptions, and they don't actually bubble up, and it ends up being pretty hard to get, you know, to kind of get access to what you need at all these various levels. So let's just dump this exception that got thrown. And we know that this is the invalid count exception. And then I'm also going to dump this calls. And what this is going to kind of prove is we should get this exception here. We're catching it, but we're catching it higher up where we now have access to the calls that we recorded. And that's going to allow us to kind of add additional information to this exception and or rethrow a brand new type of exception. So let's run this again. We see that the tests pass. The test passes because we're not rethrowing the exception. So let's fix that. Not rethrow. I wish it was called rethrow actually. So let's throw the exception again. We'll rethrow it technically. Okay, so we're back to where we're getting that original failure, but now we have this invalid count exception. It's already pre-formatted its own message. it knows kind of the method that was supposed to be called, right? Here, kind of in this method information, it's got an actual count 0, expected count 1, so that, again, this is all the specific data to this invalid count exception. And then it's got all the stack trace stuff. And then here are our calls, right? So here's the call that was actually made in our code. So the first argument matches, but the second argument does not. And here's, whoa, hello. Nice copy paste there. But the second argument doesn't, this part. This part specifically doesn't match. And that is the comparison I wish Mockery would kind of make. So I'm just gonna do a rough example of this. So let's just say for each calls, for each call, this is gonna give us the argument. So we know, because the expectation director is being called in this manner, we know that this call is specific already for put. So we don't have to do any kind of verification. All we're doing now is to go through the calls and see if there's like a similar one, right? So to do that, we would say for each calls, or not calls, we would do call. This is kind of the call, and then I want index, and I want, this is the argument. So each call is a set of arguments, technically. So let's just change this to arguments so we don't get, and then this is gonna get a little ugly, but let's use PHP units assert equals, and we'll say, what do we need here? We would need to know the exceptions. Does it have a get arguments? It does not. Oh, wait, no, not the exception, the expectation. Does this have get? No, it doesn't. Does get mock have arguments? Get arguments? Nope. Okay, let's come back to that in a second. Yeah, okay, well, we can't really come back to that. Let's do this. Instead of dumping the exception, let's dump the expectation that we failed on. And let's just comment this out for now. And let's get rid of calls because we already know what's in there. Vendor, there we go. All right, let's see what's in here. I need the arguments. Expected args. Expected args. How do I get this? Expected args. I probably don't have access to that. What is this? Mockery expectation. Let's go take a look. So we got this expectation. What's in here? Where do we get the expected args? Protected. Everything in here is going to be protected, so I don't have access to it. Expected args array. Arguments expected by, okay, great. Okay. Okay. Who uses this? Does anybody use this? So toString outputs it. Match args. See, here's kind of, again, I understand why these exceptions, as you dig in here, you understand why these exceptions are the way they are. You could have an expectation that has like an any matcher, you know, and because of that, you know, this output, you know, this output's very, very complicated. Handling all the possible combinations of the mock and then the type of thing that you're trying to match against, like you know, I can see why this is difficult, which is also why I would want to just rely on PHP unit, because they've kind of already figured out all the diffs of all the different types when you call assert equals. But this is kind of like a very, very specific proof of concept. So that's why this is going to need a lot more work. Anyway, let's just do this. Let's just do public function get arguments, returns an array, and yeah, exactly. All right, let's go back down to where we were. Again, we're just kind of hacking and adding what we need here. So let's say get arguments. It doesn't know what that is. And then we would effectively index that. So assert equals expected. Yeah, the actual call. Yeah, this is what you expected to get. Here's what you actually got, the argument that came across. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Aha! Failed asserting toString. Let's get rid of this dump. Here we go. Okay, failed asserting that two strings are equal, expected actual. And okay, here it shows. I keep doing that. It shows the difference. That's exactly what I'm after. It's a little condensed. But it does show the difference. Now, ideally, it wouldn't be PHP units exception. It'd be really cool if this said, again, kind of Mockery's thing, where it was like, instead of failed asserting that two strings are equal, it'd be nice, again, to say like, found a similar call with the second argument, different. We could definitely print out the call that was similar, like in a one-to-one case, right? And again, this kind of demonstrates all the variations. Like, if you have an exact match of 1 in this case, and you got one other call, well, then we could demonstrate the two, right? That were similar, right? But if you expected 3 things to be called and it only got 1, it's not going to display this level of detail. So again, all the different paths that you kind of have to cover to get this really, really dialed in, which again makes it pretty complicated. Plus 2, to put all of these try catches in the right spot, and now if you really wanted to get the diff, from PHP unit, now you got to catch the assertion, or you got to write your own diff or leverage their library. It gets a little, again, this is why it gets a little crazy. The fact that the chat is also completely silent demonstrates that this is deep effing mockery. Oh man. Here's what I want to do. What I want to do is what I would want to do, I think that right now we've only added 2 things to Mockery. We've added this getter, which I don't feel is that controversial, meaning I feel like it would, if it were explained in a PR of why you wanted access to that, I feel like it would get merged. And then we've added calls to the expectation director, which again gives you access to the other recorded calls that have been made to this mock. Again, pretty innocuous, right? Pretty simple change, doesn't hurt anything, doesn't have any other side effects anywhere in the code. We're just tracking additional information, which can now be used for all sorts of new features. The point is, once I start adding a bunch of try catches to like 15 different places in the code and I don't bubble up the same exception, now I'm really changing core behavior of Mockery, and so I don't think that this is the right path. I think that this is a good demonstration per se. Like, it demonstrates the depth of this change. Ultimately, what I'm getting at, though, is that instead of changing all this, I think what's going to have to happen is I'm probably going to need to add an exception handler that taps into or listens for, kind of like collision. If you, let's say you add a trait to catch Mockery exceptions, okay? So let's just spend like 10 more minutes and try that. Let's say that for this specific test, I set an exception handler. And this thing takes, this function must be defined for the calling. Wait. Oh, sorry. No, that's good. Okay, so let's do this. Let's do previous. I think you have to track these. So we'll set exception handler to be a function. What does this receive? Let's just get out of here and take a look. Let's get out here and take a look. How does this work? Okay, we get a callback and you get a throwable. Okay, cool. So let's just finish out our little bit here. Again, I'm not too worried about the previous right now. So let's do throwable. You get a throwable exception, and let's just dump the exception for now. So let's import, well, let's just slash that out. Let's dump that. Can you rethrow from here? I think that would be like a recursive issue. Okay. What I'm trying to prove is that could I wouldn't have access to calls. But could I remove all of this try catch? Could I effectively undo these changes other than just the setters and getters, you know, the properties and getters that I've added? Could I catch that up here, right? Because if so, then I could create a separate package, or potentially add to collision, potentially, that you could say, oh, improved Mockery exceptions or something, let's call it, right? And this would just have a handler that catches specifically Mockery stuff, anything else it rethrows, and that potentially bubbles up. That's all I'm trying to prove here. So I took that code out. We know we should throw an invalid count exception for Mockery. Do we get this dump? Dump null. Oh, that's inexact. Okay, so we don't seem to get that. So I probably didn't have it set up correctly. Exact. Let's dump out because. Whoops. Let's go back here. Okay, so my exception handler is not. Okay, so set the default exception handler if an exception is not caught within a try-catch block execution. Okay, so my guess is there's probably something lower already catching this in Mockery and or PHP unit. That's my guess. So of course you wouldn't be able to set it this low. So let's do this. Let's go back to Mockery. Let's just look inside of Mockery to see if they're doing this. Okay, Mockery itself doesn't do this. My guess is PHP unit is doing this. So let's go to PHP unit. Yeah. So use function, set it. So this for each backup global exception handlers as handler, set exception handler. All right, previous handler, while true, previous handler. Restore. Okay, so they empty them out to get the previous handler. This is deep. More deep stuff. For each res handler. Where are these coming from? What's res? Array reverse. Oh. I got you. They're removing theirs and then they're unwinding the previous ones that were on here. I see. And if they don't, once they stop having them, then they don't put them back on anymore. So I guess this is kind of an interesting way to take them off and put them back on. What I want, where is there? Okay, set global handler. So this is already one. I guess my point here is that if I put a dump here, I think mine is getting set after PHP unit already does its stuff. No? Where do they set it? I know it's because someone else is setting an exception handler. It might not be PHP unit. Where is this actually? Let's just go look. What is this? Oh yeah, okay, interesting. So restore, oh, this is the restore. Where does it actually add them? Backup, okay. Backup global exception handlers. What is this? Is set exception. Activate exception handler. Okay, this is actually activating them. Okay, so it's. I see. This is the activation. I think if you look at the docs, sets the default, exception will stop. Okay, so I think null may be passed instead to reset this handler to its default state. Returns the previously defined as or null on error. If no previous handler, null is also returned. Nice. Okay, so the point is they put, to get the previous exception handler, they put an empty exception handler on the stack. They push one on there. And then they immediately restore it. So if they have one, then they know that it's an old one, and then they restore it again to pop that one off the stack. And they keep doing this and doing this and doing this to pop off all the previous exception handlers. So, because yeah, I think the point is here is that you can stack them. So one of them is getting hit before ours. You would need to add ours. Let's do this. Let's dump res. Let's dump res and see what we get. This is probably gonna, yeah, okay. All right, we got a closure. Oh, okay, it does have ours. Oh, orchestra test bench. Okay, so orchestra's probably getting it. Here's ours though. So ours is getting registered. It's orchestra. Orchestra's got its on before us. That's all it is. And they reversed it. Okay. For giggles, maybe I don't reverse them. Maybe I don't reverse them so ours gets called. Let's not reverse them. See what happens. No, something else is still. Or did we just rethrow ours? I forgot. I thought we had a dump in ours. Yeah, we do have a dump. I'll have to do some more research on this. I would have expected ours to now be called. Where is that? So now you go through and you set it. So ours is first, right? How are these? Are these stacked up in a way? How does this work? Returns the previously defined or no. Okay, so sets the default exception handler. Such is not caught. Execution will stop after callback is called. So clearly, yeah, if execution stops, then clearly it's not bubbling up. There were only the two here. No, wait. I think I don't want to not reverse it. So it'll put R's on, then it'll put orchestras on. So ours wouldn't be the first, actually, if we reverse it. This should put orchestras on, and then ours. Ours should be top of the stack. So ours should get called first. But it's not. Why is it not? Is something else catching this before us? Oh. Ah. I think we're looking for the wrong thing. Okay. All right, hold on. I think we're looking for the wrong thing. I think what we need to look for in Mockery is a catch. Yeah. Does Mockery just output its own? Yeah. Mockery teardown. Is this getting called? Is this where we're getting? Yeah. Okay. Okay. What's Mockery close do? Is this close? No. Get instance. Okay, so we... I'm just trying to see if Mockery catches something high enough up where... Okay, restore air handler. What is this doing? Attempt instantiation via unserialization. Could not produce... I don't think this is... No. It's gotta be one of these. It's gotta be one of these. I think it's one of these two. It's attempting to verify it catches, but then it should rethrow here, right? Let's do this. Let's dump the instance, or well, no, the exception class. Yeah. I don't think this, I don't know where we're kind of getting in the weeds here. I don't know where, but to me, the combination of the fact that these aren't being called and this message here that it didn't remove its exception handlers, to me means somewhere, to me means Mockery is somewhere stopping execution. Even though it's saying that it's rethrowing, I think something in teardown might be not working as expected. And maybe it is orchestra. Let's just go look at orchestra's. Maybe it is getting here. 206. Let's go check this out. Is this, yeah, orchestra, all right. And then 202, was it? 206. No, that's not the right. Handle exceptions. Handle exception. Handle exception. I'm here in the chat. Maybe somebody knows something. At the bottom of the test, you add the exception handler in add. At the bottom of the test, you added the exception handler in add restore exception handler. What does restore exception handler do? Restores the previously defined exception handling function. Used after changing the exception handler function to revert the previous exception handler. I agree something else is causing it. It's just interesting these kind of aren't getting hit. I think maybe we'll mess with this next time. I'll do a little more research. That's definitely what's going on. It's just interesting to me that if it was PHP unit, it would unravel these and you wouldn't see this message. It would unravel those, meaning it would restore the previous. And what it's doing is it's... And to the point of the chat, this message does come from PHP unit. If we don't limit to Mockery. Yeah. It's this. So, I agree. It's probably something in PHP unit. I'm not exactly sure where that is. It does seem to be accepting our other stuff, but they don't end up getting called. I don't know why they don't get called. Something's stopping it before and then giving us this output, right? So yeah, again, it's likely PHP unit and it's just calling toString. Because I bet you if we go look at this invalid count exception, the message that it sets, or does it have a toString? No. It doesn't have a toString, but I think when we saw it already built up the messaging for it. So it's just dumping out the message that it says with the stack trace. So anyway, I'll toy around with it and make sure I have the proper setup. Let me do a little more research off stream. I think we've gotten a little too far into the weeds here. So yeah. I mean, even if this isn't gonna work to the point of the chat because something else is gonna catch this beforehand. Yeah, it's just giving us. Yeah, that just chops ours off. So anyway, yeah, whoever's in chat saying all that, thank you. Feel free to message me the specific code you want to see here. But from my understanding of this, the actual expectations, the actual expectation is failing through Mockery and then getting caught by PHP unit. So I think it's something where we'd have to register this a little higher up. So PHP unit either respects it or it happens before PHP unit's own, exception handling. So I'll look into that for next week. We'll toy on with this just a bit more, because I think if I can figure out the proper registration of the exception handler and or tap into the one PHP unit is going to get the way something like collision might, then I would have what I need. I would just then need to inject into Mockery's exceptions, the right ones and say, okay, well, these were the other calls, right? I mean, if it's just a generic exception, then whatever. But if you could do that, then I think you could write a completely separate package that just said, oh, hey, you're a Mockery exception. I'm gonna eat that and do the thing. So we'll see. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining on this deep dive of Mockery. We'll carry on one more time next week.